Welcome back to another segment of Tip Time, where we take a deep dive into your questions. Today, I'm going to be covering my number one step for learning to cross step. Now, on the channel already, in previous videos, I've covered things like how to make sure we're controlling our cross step to stay nice and balanced, nice and centered, and give us as much chance of success as possible. But today, I wanted to specifically talk about our position on the board and how this actually dramatically affects our success of cross-stepping and steers us away from one of the key mistakes we often make. Now, when I ask people their number one fear of cross-stepping, there's usually one answer and one answer only, and that's nosediving. And that's super understandable because at this point where we're learning cross-stepping, if we're learning to cross-step forwards, we're probably not quite at the point where we can comfortably cross-step backwards either. And so our risk of nosediving and our ability to pull backwards really does become a fair limitation of ours. And unfortunately, because of this sort of leaves us with a bit of an ultimatum. We either face our fears and learn to cross-step and risk nosediving fairly often, or we go the other way and don't attempt cross-stepping at all. What I'd like to share in this video is the best of both worlds, where we increase our stability and chance of success with cross-stepping, and we dramatically decrease our chance of nosediving almost to zero with this particular method. Now, let's get into how that actually might work. Alright, so let's go through exactly how this would work. Essentially, there's one main reason why we, of course, lead ourselves to nosediving if we're beginning a cross step, and that's because we're coming too far forward on the board for the position in the wave that we're on. In order not to nosedive on a longboard and we're cross stepping, we either need to not be stepping into the front part of the board, which places more weight onto the nose, or we need to be in the critical section, and so making sure that we've got enough water placed down on the tail so that when we do come to the forward part of the board, that we've got enough of a counterweight so that we don't cause that board to nosedive. Our position on the wave also affects this, and again, I have gone through this in previous videos, so if you haven't checked those out already, they might be something helpful to look at. But the number one tip that I have for making sure that we don't nosedive when we're cross-stepping and also staying as stable as we possibly can is actually starting our cross-stepping from the tail and moving through to the center of the board. And this works really well for a couple of reasons, which I'll break down in depth here. Firstly, as we spoke about, if we're cross-stepping from the tail of the board and coming through to the middle, our starting point is drastically different to where it usually is. Typically, from a normal pop-up, we might be popping up in the middle of the board or kind of in between that back third and middle third, something which we spoke about in a few videos back in the Sunday glide. But what we want to be is essentially right in that back third to make sure that our steps lead us through to the middle. If we come through to the middle and our front foot lands right in the center of the board, there's extremely low chance that we can ever really nosedive, no matter where we are on the wave. This opens up so many doors for practicing cross-stepping. Rather than needing to wait for the perfect section, we can cross-step in the whitewater, we can cross-step on the flats, we can cross-step right down the bottom of the wave and get our repetitions in. This is extremely important because the repetitions in is going to correlate exactly to how fast we're able to learn to cross-step. If we're only getting a successful cross-step in every 2, 3, 4 sessions, then it's going to be really hard to understand the feeling and being able to make sure that we're able to correct ourselves when we're coming into these positions. So cross-stepping from the tail is imperative from that point of view. The other thing it's really useful for is actually our balance and stability when we're cross-stepping. I like to think that the center of the board is the most stable possible position on the board. As soon as we move either to the tail or to the nose, that stability will go down, particularly towards the nose where we do get very wobbly, especially if we don't know how to balance ourselves in this section of the board. So what we're actually able to do by cross-stepping from the tail to the middle is make sure that we're actually learning a new process or a new cross-step and landing in the most balanced possible part of the board. Now this makes such a significant difference because instead of having to learn two things, trying to learn to balance yourself in a part of the board that you've never been in before and likely a part of the wave that you've never felt comfortable with before either, we can instead make sure we're coming back to a part of the board where we already feel comfortable. This is where we've kind of learned to surf, how to first gain our balance, right chest over front foot in the middle of the board. And so what we want to plan on doing is making sure we're cross-stepping from the tail to the middle, landing chest over front foot in the middle of the board, and this can be coming into our stable position. It's a great way to make sure that we're consolidating our stance and our stability after the cross step, and it's just I've not found a better way to go about learning to cross step in the earlier phases than this. Now, the other thing is, how do we get to the tail? There's a couple of different ways to do this. Firstly, if you can adjust your pop-up to land at the tail, given the appropriate type of wave, if it's steep enough or if you're really quick with your cross step and you can manage to make sure that you're not going to fall off the back of the wave and you get to the steps in time, this is a great way to go about that. The other way that we can do is make sure that we do a little shuffle backwards to begin with. The way that you might like to start with this is just by coming from your normal stance and then bringing that front foot backwards. So we can think of this as a back step and a replace that step. So take that right foot for a goofy footer, left foot for a natural footer, take it back so that you've got a narrow stance, and then replace that cross step with where that front foot was. This is a really good way to do it, and making sure that we don't have to venture too far up the board and again risk nose diving. The other way that we can go about this again is taking the back foot further back on the board, bringing the front foot further back on the board. So this is a shuffle backwards and then cross stepping forwards with the intention of making sure that we land that front foot right dead center so that we're in the most balanced position on the board and we've got a really, really low risk of nose diving on there as well. I like to use this as the initial starting point for cross stepping so that we become really comfortable getting in our repetitions for cross stepping and becoming balanced and just really getting used to the feeling and how we're supposed to hold our weight onto the front foot and everything else that we've previously discussed in the prior videos. And then we can use that as a stepping stone to then learning how to then maneuver our cross steps from the center of the board to the front. So I hope you found that really useful. And again, you can use this as your starting point for learning to cross step. I do have some other videos which I do recommend you go check out with regards to body positioning and placement of the feet when you're cross stepping. Helps a lot in that initial phase and again as you're learning how to do this. But I hope you can use this to get yourself started, and I'd love to hear how it's going. So make sure you leave your progressions and any questions that you do have in the comments below. If you do enjoy what we're doing here, please feel free to subscribe or check the links out in the description below. We'll catch you on the next one.